Hey, welcome to On This Hill, a podcast of Church on the Hill. We're glad that you're joining us today. And as you can see, we've switched out Pastor Jason for a new model, a better model, actually maybe a little bit older model. But Pastor Jason is dropping his daughter off at the airport to take off on a missions trip. And so we have Mark Godfrey with us. Mark and his wife Darlene have been part of Church on the Hill for quite a few years. But it's good to have you with us.
Oh, glad to be here.
Yeah. Mark is not from Oregon. Where are you from, Mark?
From New Hampshire, about 60 miles north of Boston. Spent most of my life there, but I was in the Air Force prior, about 12 years in that school in Colorado, and also I traveled around the world, lived in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas. I was a C-130 pilot for a number of years there. And traveled around.
Oh, so what? How old were you when you went in the military, more or less?
I was 17 when I went to college at the Air Force Academy. So I was there for
and that was Colorado.
Colorado for 4 years, and then graduated there, and then was in the Air Force.
And you wanted to be? Were you a pilot?
I was a pilot, C-130 pilot. So.
And did you receive that training at the academy there, or right?
No,
out?
just basic training there. Then I went down to Columbus, Mississippi, and did initial jet training, and then back to Little Rock, Arkansas for C-130 training, and I stayed there for about 5 years.
So for the non-military people, C-130s are the giant aircraft?
One of the larger. It's actually a small cargo airplane compared to many, but it is fairly big, a 4-engine turboprop, and carries a lot of, does all sorts of things. It's used all over the world for many, many different missions.
Wow. So was that a childhood thing? You wanted to be You wanted to be a pilot when you were a kid?
No, I enjoyed flying. My dad was a Navy pilot, and so
it was in the family.
He was in the family, but it was more just had the opportunity to do that.
Well, thanks for serving us. So you were in the military for how long total then?
About 12 years, counting school.
Interesting, huh? Yeah. And so what was going on in the world during that time? What I mean, there's always something going on. What was going on?
Right. We were just finishing Vietnam because I was in the early 70s. So I was at school from 74 to 78, so in the military. So a lot of our instructors had been prisoners of war over there. They had been in Vietnam. So I was actually in during a quiet time, if you could believe it, in between. And when I was flying, in the lull, they were doing some missions around the world. There was some hot spots here and there, and we'd call it sneak and peek. You'd leave and wouldn't be able to tell your family where you're going and where you're coming. But more in Central America, South America was where I went. Couple times.
Really? Were you single at that time?
No, I was married.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you would be gone and you'd tell your wife, I'll see you in a few weeks, a few months?
No, a few weeks.
Weeks. Huh.
Yeah.
I bet you've got a lot of stories.
Yes, we do. Had some interesting stories. It was a fun time. I really enjoyed my time in the military and highly recommend it. And as I reflect, I see things in my life, and I say, where did that come from? And I think it's the values I got at the academy and in flying. I flew a crew airplane, so we were very much a team. We had 5 people on our crew, and we all had different jobs to do, but yet when somebody needed help, you help them out. And even though I might have been the pilot, if we went to a remote place and we needed to load the airplane, we helped the load master. We did, we have to refuel the airplane. So everybody did what they needed to do.
Tight-knit group.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty. So 12 years, that's a significant amount of time in an adult life.
Yeah.
Did you ever consider being career military?
I did. Just had the opportunity to go back and work with my dad in New Hampshire at a small manufacturing company, and that was sort of my desire to have an impact and work with people closer. Military is like a large corporation. You just keep moving every couple of years, and it's different people, and it's great experience, but you really can't put your roots down. So really that's what I wanted to do. So
kind of a sense of permanence. And so those roots went down in New Hampshire?
In New Hampshire, yeah. I'd grown up there, left, and then went back there.
Cold winters.
Cold, snowy winters. They're getting plenty of snow right now.
And so, Mark, you're in Oregon. That's all the way across the country. How did that happen?
Well, I said I was in business for about 30 years, owned a manufacturing company in New Hampshire, and then Darlene and I, we had 3 boys between us. And then in 2015, we looked at each other and said we had 4 grandchildren on the West Coast and
okay.
2 more on the way.
Follow the grandkids.
And said we have this opportunity to retire early and be closer and to be involved in their lives. So we came out to Salem, Oregon.
Yeah. So how many grandkids total? You just had one.
Just had one. We're at number 10 now.
Number 10.
So we have 7 locally and 3 in Milan, Italy.
Wow. So you're still traveling.
We still travel.
Yeah. Yeah, that last grandson was born January 2nd. Almost a New Year baby.
That's right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mark also has the claim to fame to being the father-in-law of Brigitte, who was our event coordinator. She was the one who had the baby. Congratulations to you, Brigitte.
Yes.
So business has always been sort of in your family, it sounds like.
Yes.
What kind of business was it, if you don't mind me asking?
It was a manufacturing business. We had about 100 employees, and it was an old manufacturing. It started out making brushes for the textile and shoe industry.
Oh, okay.
And I tell people my company started before Oregon was a state. It's been around since 1852. So
let your mind roll on that for a while.
That's right. But it was an old line company that helped. I joined them in 1985 and helped bring them to sort of the 20th and 21st century. And people think of brushes as shoe brushes and toothbrushes, but their brushes are used for many, many different things.
Oh, yeah.
We did more specialty. It goes in machinery equipment.
Yeah.
And in Oregon, you have a lot of agriculture here. Well, anything that plants a seed, there is a brush that actually meters that seed. And we sell to John Deere and many other.
Really?
And aircraft, we do machine parts for some GE engines. Wow. And we work automobiles, seals, things like that. So all sorts of things you don't see our brushes, and we sell to people, large corporations around the world.
And that company still exists?
Still exists, yeah.
Are you involved with that at all still?
I am. I'm still on the board of directors there, so I go back a couple times a year. And we sold, when my dad retired, and eventually we sold his portion to the ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership plan, so the employees own that.
Wow.
And half of it. And then when we retired, we sold it back to the company, and so we're still involved with that.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I asked Mark to join us today is because he's also involved in business, but maybe from a little bit of a different angle, not so much a career job that puts food on the table, but now is a mission, business with a mission. That's the concept, but maybe that's not the name. But tell us a little bit about that. What do you...
It's a movement, I guess we would call it. It's called Business as Mission.
Business as Mission.
Business as Mission, and it's more, it's been around, business as a ministry. It goes back to Amazing Jesus.
Yeah, right.
I tell people or, remind them that when you think about Jesus, when he was in his probably 15-year-old, or younger working with his dad, he was in construction or a carpenter. Yeah. And then it wasn't until 30 when he really started. So those 10 or 15 years, what did he do? He was a business person.
That's interesting. Yesterday, I was in a meeting with a group of pastors here in the Salem area, and one of the pastors, a good friend of mine, pastors a church here in Salem, feels like God is leading him to actually leave the full-time pastoral ministry and go back to bivocational because he wants to be in the business world. So he loves pastoring. He feels like that's his call, but he wants to get into the business world and be what we would call, again, bivocational. And so, but your thing, Business as a Mission, is an organization? I
call it a movement, and that's what the people, we've been involved since probably 2012 or so and started doing that. And have done it in various aspects. And one of the difficulties is it's a movement all around the world, and there's many different on-ramps, many people involved. And we usually it's in developing countries, but it's also can be here. And it's a way of it's really just integrating, Jesus into everything we do, and using business as a tool, as to make an impact around the world. Yeah. And I've seen many opportunities how God has used it. There are some countries, many that are closed to missionaries, but they are very open to business and even overtly Christian business. I've talked to a number of people that these countries that would welcome. They see the values. God's light shines in darkness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Regardless.
it's amazing how attractive it is to many people around the world, even though they may not like the concept of Christianity, but the values are there, and they will welcome the help.
That's
and
so
you're
interesting.
creating jobs. You're actually helping the economy.
So maybe you could just give us like an example so we can kind of get a picture of what that might look like. It's a developing country or a closed country. So there's a group of men or women who want to start some kind of a business. Yeah, and you don't have to mention the actual country, but for
There's
example.
one great example is in Southeast Asia, and it's a small coffee shop called Joma. And I actually visited one. They had 2 or 3 coffee shops when I was in Cambodia back in 2017 or 16, something. I was going to a class over there in Thailand, and they set up a coffee shop. And in Cambodia, it is lying and stealing is the norm.
Right.
And that's just the
Corruption
way
is
they
just
live.
part of
There
it.
is no values. And people would steal from their business, their owners or whatever, and they'd get yelled at and fired. Well, these 2 guys, Michael and I can't remember his other name, started this coffee shop and were going to do it differently. They were going to instill, their goal was to look at the values, Christian values, and instill in these young people, how not to lie,
Right.
steal. And they really started to grow that. This was said, a few coffee shops, and just recently now back, how many years later, Darlene and I had the opportunity to invest with them because they are now up to 17 coffee shops all throughout Southeast Asia. They're really making an impact. They're hiring people. They look at their ministry as taking these young people, teaching them values, Christian values. They start churches, they plant churches, and then they, go out, and whether they promote them out into other business, but they're really changing their lives.
That's interesting that, so on one hand, you're running a business and the business has to make money, right?
That's right,
Or it
yes.
can't survive. But on the other hand, you're parenting young men and women.
That's right.
And so do you ever find, do those lines ever get blurred in the sense of we don't have time for your nonsense, we've got a business to run, or you know what I'm saying? How do you manage those 2 things?
It's a good question. Usually we've taught in business's mission, you look at the 4 different values. You have to be, profits is one, but people and the environment and just how you do that, and the spiritual aspect. So you look at those 4 different areas and try to set goals and balance those.
One more time, profit,
people, the environment, and spiritual.
right? Yeah, the kingdom.
The kingdom.
basically.
So usually when we're coaching business people, we look at that and set goals, and those goals are going to be different depending on where you are, especially on the spiritual side. If you have a closed country, the goals may be we're going to be able to speak to 2 to 3 people a month
Yeah,
or a
sure.
year
Yeah.
about spiritual things.
Yeah,
But yet we can meet their physical needs.
yeah.
So it is. It's a
So
challenge.
they're shifting
They're
in
shifting
a sense
around.
of which one you have to pay attention to today.
But I think it's like many organizations, you're always having to balance priorities. There's different things, but you want to be intentional in all 4 areas.
Right. Yeah. They're always on the
They're
dashboard,
always on the net. And
so to speak. Yeah.
I think, God's economy is not our economy. And I think that's what you have to balance. There are situations come up and say, okay, this may not make sense economically,
Yeah. Right.
but this is what God wants us to do.
Right.
And I think if that's the question you're asking, that's what's important.
It kind of keeps you on track.
That's right.
That's interesting. That's so fascinating. So, does this work in the home in the United States? Is
Definitely. Yet there is.
Is it easier? Is it harder? Is it what are the? I imagine in a developing country or in a closed country, there are certain pitfalls, right? My wife and I worked in overseas in missions for 15 years, and there we had a nonprofit. It was a religious nonprofit, but there were certain pitfalls. There was corruption. There was resistance. There was outright, in some ways, just persecution may be a strong word, but it was slanted in their favor against us. And,
Right.
and we weren't there to make money, but we were there for the gospel's sake and the kingdom, but we had to have a legal entity. So what about in the U.S. where there's religious freedom? Are there pitfalls on this side?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say in the United States, you don't have as much corruption, but you can't be as free sharing the gospel. Whereas overseas, you can actually, yes, there's corruption and there's a lot of resistance to some things, but they're much more open to the gospel. So you can be you can have prayer meetings, you can do a lot more things like that than you can in the United States, because all of a sudden people think, well, this is persecution, you can't do that.
Right.
So
a little more litigation there.
But it is definitely much riskier. When you look at the risk when you're investing in a developing country, there is the risk of corruption, could be governments overthrown, all those
uncertainties,
things. But that's a risk you look at, and that's why there's a new movement that's probably been around for 4 or 5 years. It's called faith-driven investing and faith-driven entrepreneur, and Darlene and I have become much more involved in that recently. And it's neat. Just for example, I just left a Zoom call to come here with about 15 people from mainly around the country, but some around the world. These are investors saying, how can we learn more and invest in different businesses around the world?
That's
and it's
fascinating.
looking at, we all think about our tithe and how we want to invest it for God's kingdom.
Yeah.
Well, now, we've been learning in this faith-driven investing movement is saying, well, all of our assets belongs to God.
Yeah.
Why don't we look at our 401ks, our IRAs, our retirement? How is that being impacted? Every investment has an impact, positive or negative. And when we put something in the stock market in a company, have we thought about, is this company exploiting children?
Yeah.
Is it, damaging the environment? Are those the values we want? And it's now moving, say, no, let's look at those, and we can actually, there are companies that are run by biblically based values or values that we line up with.
That's so interesting. Kind of a holistic approach, right?
Definitely.
Where the gospel touches every area of my life, not just my Sunday
That's right.
morning.
When you think about it, there is, I don't know how many $1 trillion of Christian people's investments that are in the stock market that can be used around the world and positively, even if you want to be in the stock market. Now, financial advisors are realizing we can be proactive, not just negative screening, meaning we don't want to invest in such and such a company.
Yeah.
But there are good, biblically value-based, stock market companies.
Mark, I want to just lob you something else here, kind of off the cuff, but the word investment. I think we basically know what that word means. But how does that word, because Jesus never, maybe he did, I don't think he ever used the word investment, but Jesus told a bunch of parables, the parable of the talents, different men were given different talents and he came back and did some accounting. What did you do with those talents?
Right.
And maybe that's where he did use the word, you should have invested it. Talk about the investment idea from a kingdom perspective, because I think we get what's the hottest stock or what's paying the highest rate. But because you've used this word the whole time,
right?
But from a kingdom perspective, why is investment a big deal?
I think it's because when we think of investment or return on investment, we think of just money. But it isn't just money. It's a return on investment, could be my time, my resources. So one model that we look at in faith-driven investing is, let's look at our portfolio, and there is investment or the return, there is a financial return, but there's also a spiritual return. And you can put that on a graph and say, okay, I want to look at my portfolio and say, some of this I'm going to have a higher monetary return.
Interesting.
But a lower spiritual return. But some of my portfolio, no, I'm going to take a lower than market or less than market return on investment as far as financial, but it's a higher kingdom impact.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So a financial return is easy to map on a spreadsheet. I put this in, it sat for this long, and this is what I got.
Right.
But a spiritual return, how do you measure something like that, or how do you?
There's different
how
ways.
do you gauge it?
it depends on, again, where they are, what country is,
Right.
but it could be how many churches they're planting. Are they just being positively impacting people? Is it education? And a thing is, are they helping people, children, educated in Christian values? There could be just many other spiritual returns. They're more subjective, but you can make it more objective. It's more, are they intentional, and what are the fruit?
Yeah.
And
is this place better because I've been here?
that's right.
Are people better, not just better in the sense of better fed, but better holistically, right?
Right. I think one of the biblical term is, shalom, which is sort of wholeness.
Yeah.
And I think that's how you look at it. Prosperity. Are the people better off? Are we meeting the needs of, many times we need to feed them water, give them clean water, health care. Those are positive impacts.
Yeah.
That's huge. And I think that's a real impact that you see. Usually, for example, one organization we're with, anti-human trafficking, is Not for Sale, and they have worked down in the Amazon.
That's the name of the organization.
Name of the organization.
Not for Sale.
Not for Sale. And coincidentally, this month and today is National Anti-Human Trafficking Month.
Really?
So,
I didn't realize that. Huh.
yeah, so it's really, that's one area that Darlene and I are very involved with, especially Not for Sale, but also IJM, which is International Justice Mission around the world. But Not for Sale looks at it a little differently. They create businesses that return and help. So they started a business called Rebel Drink. I don't know if people have seen that, and it's a whole food drink. And they started it with down in the Amazon in Peru. And they went to the people there and said, how can we help you? And they have Brazil nuts. And so he got David Batstone started, and they got the best people and said, what can we do with the Brazil nuts? And they came up with this drink, and this is now a huge corporation around the world, and they have actually transformed the Amazon, and that was a big area for human trafficking.
Right.
And giving people jobs, we look at rather than just, there isn't a need to go in and rescue people out of human trafficking. People don't realize there's 40 million people around the world that are being trafficked.
In one form or another.
More in slavery
Men
now.
and women, boys
mainly,
and girls.
Yeah, mainly children and women, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, give them a job, and that helps prevent. Go upstream, what's happening.
Yeah, because so much is driven by those upstream issues.
That's right.
Yeah.
So down there, they have now created jobs. They've worked with the farmers, and now they've actually almost eliminated human trafficking down there. And then one of the big areas, too, around the world, why farmers get exploited is the middle person. They buy real cheap, whether it's coffee or whatever the resource, and then they make the money selling it to the
Mark it up.
Yes, Rebel has just created or built a processing plant down in Peru, and now all these farmers own this processing. It's a co-op, so they're getting the profits.
Right.
So
when you're buying coffee or goods, are you looking for that? Like, I want to see what are the origins? Where did this come from? Who grew it? Who profited by it?
That's right. Fair trade is one. Another organization called Freedom Businesses. FBA, Freedom Business Alliance. They are starting business all around the world, mainly at trafficking survivors. But we're trying to be very conscious. Where are we buying it and from? And actually, just recently, got some products from a company called the Source Matters, and they are trying to help businesses, and whether it's coffee and there's some honey and some other things. But it's real important. Even the clothes we wear, every time we shop, you can go online and find out where it was made, who made it, what are their values. So it's hard. Everything is so easy these days, but it's
and
online. cheap.
Yeah, so
cheap isn't necessarily
righteous.
Good, and they aren't always being good to the employees.
Mark, before I forget, one more time, the group that's in the Amazon, what are they called?
Not for Sale.
Not for Sale. And that drink is called Rebel?
Rebel. REBBL.
BBL. And is that around somewhere?
Yes, it's in
here in our area?
Yes, I would say, I've seen it at Roth's, Whole Foods, Natural
Interesting.
Grocers. Yes, it's
Yeah. So check it out, right? I
Oh,
mean, you can go
definitely.
find out, taste the product, but maybe Google and check out the background of where it came from.
That's right.
Fascinating. So, kind of a last thing here, Mark, just that parable I alluded to earlier where Jesus gives out the talents. Some multiplied, some hid it. What's your take on that? Let me back up a little bit. Like, when we lived in Latin America, in the developing countries, we were doing medical missions for a number of years. And so we were bringing down teams of doctors and dentists, healthcare people of all kinds, and doing free clinics in areas where there was no medical access, no attention, mostly indigenous areas, remote areas. And it was fascinating how little money got our attention. We just did all kinds of things, and we really didn't even think about the money. Just seemed to work. We never asked if we had any money to do something. We did it, and then the money would come. When I came back to the States and went into ministry here in the United States, back in my home country, it seemed like money was always the question. Money was always the yes or no or the indicator. And it seemed like it was such a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I remember reflecting on that, like, my goodness, here's this country that is one of the richest countries in the world, but it's oftentimes, there's fear, the pitfalls I'm talking about, or there's greed, or there's all kinds of complications that come as a result of the power of money. So that parable, what greed, and just talk for a minute about the power of greed or the power of fear to tie it all up, to tie up resources.
That, done a lot of reading and listening, and that's God says you can't serve God and mammon.
Yeah.
And the study of mammon, what mammon really is very interesting. I hadn't heard it, but money is power.
Right.
And power, it's a type of power. Most other things, you have power, you've taken it by force, or you've been appointed, and you can measure it. Money, and it's finite.
And it buys things.
And it buys things.
Influence,
Yeah.
besides material things, yeah.
But it's temporary. Money has power over many, many things.
Yeah.
And that's why it's such a slippery, the love of that money, we gravitate to that because it's really power. And I think that's what is the downfall. So you have to really divorce yourself from that and say, okay, no, it's a tool. It's a resource, just like any other resource.
Do you think that's why the Apostle Paul said to Timothy, those that want to get rich fall into a dangerous trap that can shipwreck your faith? I mean,
definitely.
I'm paraphrasing, yeah.
It's everything we own, everything we have isn't ours. We're only stewards.
Right.
And I think that's that mindset that really, I read a book recently, and actually the group I was with is called Steward Investors, that talks about we are merely stewards of God's money. And if everything we do with that money is His, are we being a good steward? And so the question, how I'm using that, is that how God wants me to use it? And it's His money. So I know when Darlene and I look at, we're going to invest it. Even investing in our tithe is an investment. Is that a good steward of His money?
Yeah.
And if yes, we can say yes. We feel with what we know it is, then that now it's His responsibility for the results.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we've invested in companies that have gone, just gone away, small companies. And that's okay because it was God's money. We felt that was where He wanted us to give it.
And you were obedient to do that.
We were obedient. And the results are His. And that's what all He asks us is to ask Him, how do you want us to use your money or our time?
Yeah. So there's people listening. You just said something, you said it several times. It all belongs to God, and He gives us back. He lets us use it, or He lets us. And there may be those listening that you're not a believer, or you're a new believer, or maybe the idea of giving away money to someone who didn't work for it, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just going to give it to an organization, or I'm going to, you used the word tithe, it comes from the Old Testament, but it's in the New Testament as well. But the idea of giving away money where I in other words, I give away money to Costco, but I'm walking out the door with groceries.
Right.
So there's an instant return. But when you're giving it away to a church or the kingdom in some way, an organization working with trafficked human beings, there's a faith element there. What is that? What would you say to somebody who said, well, why should I give, my hard-earned money to, somebody who I don't know? What would you say to them? Or even to the church, for that matter?
I guess it starts back to my money. It's not my money, and I didn't earn it. God gave it to me. He allowed me. He gave me the opportunity because I live in this country, which most people in the world live on less than $2 to $3 a day. We are the 1%. Everybody in America, is still
even a minimum wage person.
Minimum wage person is,
which is hard for us to wrap our minds around.
That's right. So that's it isn't. It's an opportunity God gave me, and it's a mindset of saying, "Oh yes, I worked hard. I have a responsibility, but He gave me that opportunity. So it isn't my money. It really, and that's hard, and that's a process.
That's the shift. Yeah,
and I think and I'm learning that. It's a growth process.
A friend of mine, a good friend who was instrumental in my discipleship in the early years, his name was Jackie Rozier. I'd love if you were out there listening right now. But they were, with a team of people, about 7 or 8, had a vision to plant a youth with a mission center in the jungle of Belize in Central America. Wow. And they bought a piece of land, and it was just mahogany trees, jungle. That's all it was. Nothing else. No running water, no electricity. And so they realized that it was going to take an amount of money so they all came back to the States and they had a plan. They said, we're going to all get jobs and we're going to work for 1 year. And we're going to everybody's going to get their paycheck. And on every Friday, we're going to get together for a time of meal and prayer. And then we're going to take 90% of our paycheck and we're going to put it in the pot to start this base. And we'll keep 10% to live on. And he tells the story of the very first time that he had worked 40 hours. I think he went and worked in a grocery store and he got his check, cashed it, and then went to that meeting that night. And he's the leader of the team, so he's obviously going to go first. And he remembers dropping that sum of money, 90% of his 40-hour paycheck, in that offering. And then he said, Bruce, I'll never forget, I had that 10% in my hand, what was left, and I could almost hear God chuckling. And he said, God said, you see that? You think you've been doing me a favor all these years. But this thing, that principle of it all belongs to God, and He gives me back a lot or a little to live on, and then but the rest to use in the kingdom. What a fascinating idea.
It is.
Yeah.
It's,
So both of us here are 2 60-some-year-old guys sitting here at this table. We're both in the fourth quarter. We'll finish with this. We're in the fourth quarter. We're not just getting started. We're not going to go build financial kingdoms, and we're not going to pioneer brand new things from the start. We want to come alongside young men and women who have great potential. What's your dream over the next 5-6 years? I want to use my time that I have, whatever the years though, and my expertise, all my experience. I want to do this with it.
Right. It's interesting you say that because
obviously you're not on the beach somewhere.
No,
you could be sitting there sipping a margarita or something. And
I look at that, and as you said, being our age, in mid-60s, saying, okay, wow, how much time do I have left? And actually looking at starting something new. I, recently when went to Africa last summer, and with Not for Sale, went to Uganda and Rwanda, and have the opportunity to actually start something. Really a small community outside of Kigali in Rwanda, and how we can really transform that community and building the foundation. And God said, that's my role right now, is to build a foundation. I may never see that house,
right,
but build the foundation.
Yeah.
And how can I do that? And I keep saying, well, maybe I can keep doing this until I'm 80. And I said, well, that's pretty good. And then I said, reading the Bible, that's when Moses was started his ministry.
Just getting started, yeah.
Oh, who am I? So as long as God can do,
Mark, this is so rich. What do you think about retirement? I mean, the concept of retirement in the Western world as it stands now, like, oh, I'm going to reach 65, I'm going to start drawing on a pension or drawing on Social Security, I'm going to buy a second home in the sun somewhere. What do you think about the whole idea? Not that those things are wrong. I'm not dashing that, but what do you think about the whole concept of retirement in regards to the kingdom?
It's not biblical.
What?
Darlene and I call it rewired. We're changing, but we're busier now than we ever were. We just don't have to get up and go to work every day at the same time. But we're busy with grandchildren. That's a ministry. We're saying, Darlene has a saying she had heard from someone that our ministry is the space between our feet. And whether it's grandchildren or whoever God brings to us that day is our ministry.
Oh, that's great.
And it's interesting, God, you have seasons of life and time. And it's actually, we came here, we were very involved with our grandchildren, spent a lot of time. And that now the time they're getting older, so it's a different type of time. And I've been praying, okay, Lord, where would you want to use me? And we've tried some things and had a time of waiting season for a couple of years. And now all of a sudden, all these opportunities this last year are just busier now. And we're having to say, no, we can't do that. That's not God's best. We have to say no to good to say yes to God's best.
Yeah, that right there. Well, I've heard it said that the enemy of the best is oftentimes the good, not the bad. It's the good.
It's the good.
Because the good draws us away. Mark, it's been so good to have you with us.
My pleasure.
You may be sitting out there, and you may be a fourth quarter individual like us, Mark and I, but there is still hills to be climbed and kingdoms to be conquered and things to be done in the kingdom. You may be a young person out there just getting started in a business world or that sort of a thing, but there's a place for everybody if there's a kingdom mindset, if we invest our lives rather than spend it.
I have a quote here that I had read. It's called it's from the Jewish Talmud, actually. It's a commentary on Micah 6, and it says, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it."
Whoa. And on that note, amen.
Amen.
It's been good to have you with us. If you like this podcast, maybe recommend it to somebody, pass it on. We're here on Sunday mornings at our South Campus and our Kaiser Campus almost every Sunday, unless we get snowed out. But we'd love to have you. If you have questions for us, send them in. You can find us on our website, On This Hill, Church on the Hill podcast. And Mark, it's been great to have you with us.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah. God bless.
Yes.